Well, hey everyone, welcome to WCC and Church Online. If this is your first time with us, welcome. We are so glad you are here, and we certainly hope that it won't be your last time. Well, as you can see with our countdown timer, we are seconds away from starting our service. We've actually been kicking off each week of this series with the message. In fact, our teaching pastor, Grant Hickman, is getting ready to go right now. What's up, Grant?
Hey, man.
Well, we are closing out our At the Table series this week, and I think it's going to be really powerful. And one of the reasons we're starting with the message up front is because each week of this series, we've been ending with a special time of communion and worship at the end. So now would be a really great time to grab a piece of bread or a cracker, some juice, wine, whatever elements you have nearby and prefer, and be ready to take communion after the message. And listen, if communion is new to you, not a problem at all. We'll explain a bit more about it later. But before Grant starts his message, I want to give you a quick update on a couple of ways your generosity is and can make an impact at WCC this holiday season. Well, at WCC, we always look for ways to give and to bless others more and more in every season. And one of the ways we do this is through partnering with local organizations throughout the area. One of the organizations we partner with in Oregon City, the Father's Heart, is a ministry that helps men and women find a safe refuge from homelessness, from hunger, and from addiction. And just this past week, we had a group of volunteers come together to prepare and pack over 200 lunches to help provide many of those who are homeless with a meal for this Thanksgiving season. As well, we are right now preparing to host our Christmas market at WCC, and you can help. In previous years, there was an opportunity as a church to come together to donate coats, gift cards, and food for the most vulnerable in our community to make sure they feel loved and cared for during the holiday season. Because of your generosity in the past, we've had hundreds of donated coats, thousands of food options, and a ton of gift cards to help these families out. But with 2020 and all of its challenges, we are unable to accept physical items this year, so we're simply asking that you consider giving towards our efforts to provide essential food and clothing to families in our community. We are incredibly excited to see what God will do because of your generosity to impact these families. This will also be a great opportunity for you and your family to volunteer and to serve at Willamette during the holiday season. We will be launching the Christmas market on December 7th, so make sure to check out our website, willamette.cc, and click the Christmas market button on the homepage. There, you will find all the information you need for how to give, how to serve, and how to make a difference this Christmas. So once again, thank you for your generosity. You are practically and eternally changing lives. Well, okay, everyone, Grant is ready to go, and I hope you are too. So thanks again for joining us today. Let's get ready for a powerful message as we continue our series, At the Table. Take it away, Grant.
Awesome. Man, thanks, Kevin. As you know, if you're watching this on Sunday, then it is November 29th. That means that Christmas is right around the corner. And as a church, we're doing everything that we can to try to make Christmas awesome this year. And I know it doesn't look like any of us wanted it to, and things are different, but that actually gives us a chance to start new traditions in the midst of a crazy year. And so if you want to know everything that's going on at Willamette, you can go to willamette.cc or check out our Facebook or Instagram social media feeds, because that's where you're going to get all the information about what we're doing. Today though, we're in this series, and you know, life is full of before and after moments. These moments where life was a certain way, and you kind of had it all together and all wrapped up, and then all of a sudden something happened to you. You saw something, you experienced something that forever changed into an after moment. Your life was never the same. You couldn't unsee what you had just seen. You couldn't unhear what you just heard. Sometimes these are humorous. Sometimes they're kind of fun. I came across one of those articles recently that was like 20 things I read on Twitter today that forever changed my life. And I just thought they were great. One of them was this. If you had one lasagna and you put it on another lasagna, you'd still only have one lasagna, which makes total sense for me. I can't believe I'd never thought of that. Or how about this one? I just realized that U-E in Q is silent. Why do we have the other letters? I don't know, but now I'll always think about that. How about this one? You can't stand backwards on stairs. Some of you need to think about that one for a minute, but you can't stand backwards on stairs. This one's even better. There is not physical evidence that to say that today is Sunday. We are just all trusting that someone kept count since the first time that it happened. So I don't really know what day of the week it is, which kind of just sounds like 2020 to me. But apparently it's always been that way. This was my favorite one though. Some of you see the picture of this map and you want to get into a debate of whether it's a flat earth or a round earth. And what you're all missing, which I can now see because once you see it, you can't unsee it, is that it's really just a cat playing with Australia. Right? Like, how good is that? Like, you're never not going to be able to see that. Anytime you see a map now, you're going to think cat playing with Australia, because there's some things that once you've experienced them, you just can't not experience them again. But other things that are before and afters, well, they're more corporate. There are things that happen to every single one of us, and we all change as a result of them. You can think JFK or Martin Luther King's assassinations were these moments in history that changed us. And 9/11, things have never been the same. We talk about a post-9/11 and a pre-9/11 world, right? Then we've got the entire year that is 2020. You maybe have already forgotten this, but it was January when Kobe Bryant died in a helicopter crash. And I remember where I was at when I heard that news, and it changed everything. It changed the world that was around us. I can think of even then when the pandemic hit and everything that was going on and everything that was happening there. And in the midst of that, we had George Floyd's death, which then forever changed the way we as a culture and a society think about things. You see, there's things that happen corporately to us that we have to stop and think about. But then there's the personal. There's the personal things that the before and afters that were never the same. Now, some of these are fun. Some of the before and afters are fun, like you finally land your dream job, the thing that you've always wanted, or the birth of a child or a grandchild, the wedding of someone in your family or that's close to you, maybe even yours, a graduation, a ceremony. These are things that we change in the midst of, but the thing is, psychology would tell us the happy things we don't change too much through. They're experiences that we have, but they fade over time. What really changes us in before and afters are the difficult things of life. The things that we wish we could forget, but we can't. It's the moment that you lost the business you'd worked your entire life to build. It's the moment that you got the diagnosis for the third or the fourth time, and this time you don't know that the treatment's gonna work. It's the moment when you get the call as a parent that you were never supposed to get, and everything changed. It was Christmas Day. Christmas Day, 2010, when my wife and I had a miscarriage. Not a Christmas goes by that I don't think about that. Oh, yeah, the pain of it isn't what it used to be. But as you can see, it still moves me in ways that I can't explain, because it's these moments of pain, it's these moments of grief that we actually learn who we are, that carry us through, and we learn more about who God is in the midst of those. They're the defining moments, because grief is never over. It just gets less intense. This time of year, for so many of you, that emotion intensifies. Because what happens is you just experienced Thanksgiving and you had this great holiday, but maybe this is the first year that you didn't have that loved one there. Or you're about to experience Christmas, and as you go into the holiday season, you see that yes, all is bright, but there's also this current inside of you that you can't ignore, because things are just different this year. It's why we've titled this message, the final one in this series, Missing at the Table. Because for many of us, We need to just sort of pause for a moment this time of year and sort of walk through and go through and admit that there is grief that we have. You know, we've all experienced grief in different ways. It's a universal truth. It's an unavoidable fact of life. Grief leaves no one unaffected. Now, I don't know why they chose me to teach the grief sermon. As you can tell, like I wear my emotions like right here. And so I've already cried once. You can jump in the chat right now and do over under on like, I'm thinking I'm going to cry at least 2 more times, okay? Like it's just going to happen because grief happens to every single one of us. The shock and the disbelief of it. Maybe you're familiar with what they call the 5 stages of grief, right? First, there's denial. Denial is that moment where the shock and disbelief that you can't even believe it happened. You don't want to admit that it happened. And then there's anger where you begin to get mad because you've lost someone and they're no longer with you. And then there's bargaining, all the what ifs and the regrets that we go through and that we wrestle with in those moments. Then there's depression that can begin to set in, or the sadness from the loss begins to overwhelm us. And then finally, there's acceptance. Acceptance where we acknowledge the reality of the loss. It doesn't mean that we're okay with the loss. We've just learned to accept it. This plays out when we lose a loved one, but it plays out in everyday life as well. We've seen that happen just recently, like, right? We all did it with having to wear masks. We went through this moment of denial where it was like, I'm not wearing one of those. I don't have to wear one of those. I don't believe the science in that. And we denied the need for it, which then led into anger when we had to. It was like, you can't make me wear a mask. I have rights. I'm not going to do it. Then we had to get into bargaining. Okay, fine, I'll wear a mask, but you didn't tell me which mask I can wear and can't wear or how to wear it. So I'm going to just like put it here as the horse trough thing or let my nose be exposed. And we began to bargain around it, which entered into finally this depression moment where we're like, okay, I hate this. I have to wear a mask. I miss that we're connecting with one another. I miss seeing your smile. I miss being able to read your lips. But then that moved to acceptance where we go, fine, if this is what I need to do in the season, I can. You see, we do it with silly things like masks, which then if you extrapolate that out, it makes sense that we do that with big things like the loss of a loved one. But the thing about these 5 stages is they were always meant to be descriptive, not prescriptive. It was individuals watching us as we grieve and saying, here's these patterns that we see, because we all move through grief in different ways and at different paces. And Scripture is full of moments of grief. In fact, you don't get but just a few pages into the Bible when you see that Adam and Eve, the first man and woman, they have 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and one of their sons kills the other one, which means the first mother that ever existed understood the pain of losing a child. You see, grief has been on the pages of Scripture and in the world from the beginning. And then you move a little bit further and you see this guy named Abraham, who God calls him out of Ur into a region that he doesn't tell him yet. And as Abraham is going, he has to grieve the loss of everything that he had known, all of his ancestry, all of his heritage, to go to something else. And even though God called him, he was still called to grieve as he went. Then you've got Moses, who is called back to the land of Egypt to deliver the Israelites out of slavery. And he goes there, and as he brings them out, there's this moment where he looks to the people, and here's what he says. He says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you a land with large flourishing cities that you did not build, houses filled with all kinds of good things that you did not provide, wells that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant. Then when you eat and are satisfied, be careful. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You know, for years I would read this and I would just focus in on the positive aspects of God bringing them out of slavery and the fun and the jubilation that must have meant. But recently I was reading a book, and it highlighted for me the pain that they would have had to also remember. Yes, they'd remember the good things where God delivered them, but they'd also remember the agony of grieving mothers at the hand of a frightened despot. They'd remember the humiliation of slavery and powerlessness, the mixture of hope and worry in the face of strange lands, right? They were coming out of a place as they left, the odor of the lamb's blood that was on the doors, the screams and the rolling sudden death of Egyptians' firstborns dying as they fled their captors, the chaos of millions of refugees suddenly on the move, literally to God knows where. The surreal drainage of a sea that moments before had seemed like death and now was life for them. Then to have foaming at the mouth war horses drowning under the weight of the greed of Pharaoh and the unfathomable exhaustion and relief that they must have felt. You see, when God calls them to remember the good that he has done, he sees them through their pain. Because it's in the midst of our pain and our grief that when we get on the other side, we can look back and hold on to the things that we know to be true and say, God was good even in the midst of it. The New Testament picks up on this idea with a guy named Paul. Paul writes to a church in Thessalonica that's a city there in Greece. You could go visit it today and see some of the ruins that are there and see some of what it looked like in Paul's day. And if you wanted to go visit it in modern day terms, you would go to the city of Thessalonica because it's got the exact same name. It's the same city, except now it's the second largest city in all of Greece. And so it's always fun when we look at scripture and we see that, man, these cities that we read about are still there today. And as Paul is writing to the Thessalonians, he's reminding them of a few things in 1 Thessalonians. One of the things that these people were kind of obsessed about is what happens when we die. It's what we would call in theology your eschatology. There's your big word for the day, okay? Your eschatology. And they were a bit obsessed with it. The world that the Thessalonians were coming out of, that worldview they had, said that once you died, that was it. That was it. We bury your body. We burn your body. There is nothing after that. And so all is just done. So eat and drink, for tomorrow we may die. But now they're following a man named Jesus, who's died on a cross, risen from the dead, conquering sin and death. And they begin to go, oh, wait a minute. If Jesus beat death, then what does that do for our loved ones that have died? What does that do for us when we die? And Paul gets word of the questions they're asking. And so he writes them this letter. And here's what he says to them in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13. Now we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who are asleep, so that you will not grieve like the rest who have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and rose, well then again, so also we believe that God will bring with him those who have fallen asleep as Christians. You see, what he's writing to remind them of is we all have grief. Everybody grieves. It is okay to wrestle through your grief as you go through grief, to have the doubts and the concerns. He understands that we all wrestle with it. Maybe he didn't have like the 5 stages of grief, but he had observed them as well. And he understands that at the core of what the Thessalonians are asking is how do we find meaning out of death? Where do we get meaning out of this, which is actually the 6th stage of grief? How do you begin to find meaning in it? And so we are tempted here. We can look around and try to find meaning as everyone around us does, or we can look to scriptures. We can look to God and say, God, I believe that even in the midst of my pain, I know this won't get easier to feel, but it will get easier over time to deal with. And so God, is the intensity lessens. I want to find meaning in life again. And what he tells them in verse 14 is where to find that meaning. He says, for we believe that Jesus died and rose again. We believe that Jesus died and rose again. There's your meaning to life. And there's the second word, it's if. For if we believe, that's a big if. If we believe that Jesus died and rose again, because grief is hard. Grief is difficult. But in the middle of it, you can hold on to that if. You can go, if Jesus has died and risen from the dead. You see, that's what faith is. Faith is being certain of what we hope for and sure of what we do not see. And in the midst of whatever you're going through, whatever you are grieving right now, in the midst of that, you can hold on to the faith of Jesus Christ, crucified and risen from the dead. You can go forward, and in other words, you can grieve as you go. This is what Abram did. Abraham, he had to leave his land, and as he went, he grieved as he was going. Moses, they're coming out of that land, and they're grieving as they're going, because life doesn't stop. It keeps moving forward. But if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, then we can keep going. You see, if you want to know what kind of faith you have, go through something hard. Life tests our belief. It's easy to say that I believe in something, but when the hard knocks of life happen, those are the moments that really test what I believe. They make my faith real because they cut to my core in the darkness of the night, and I have to cry out to God and say, God, I want to remove the if. I believe that you are there. I believe what you say is true, but you know what I love? I love that Paul keeps the if in there because he gives room for my doubt in the darkest moments. He gives room for me to stop and go, wait, in the middle of my grief, I have doubts, I have insecurities. You know, the year that has been 2020, many of us are wrestling with all sorts of things right now. And because the if is there, it gives me permission to have that conversation with God. And you could even just go to the Psalms. Do me a favor, Google lament Psalms. Go find Psalm chapter 22 or Psalm 13 or Psalm chapter 6 of these laments where the writer is going through hard things in life and he's crying out to God in the middle of it because he understands that the if is okay. Because it's in that moment that you find hope. You see, there's something about grief that is inexplainably tied to grief. Hope and grief are tied together. This is what Paul was saying in verse 13. Now, we do not want you to be uninformed. In other words, hey, I don't want you to miss this, brothers and sisters, family. I don't want you to miss this. That there are those who are asleep. There are those that have died. But you do not grieve like the rest of the world who has no hope. You see, before he gets to the resurrection of Jesus, he ties grief and hope together. And let me define hope for a minute. Hope is very different than wishing or wanting for something. So often when we use the word hope, what we mean is like I'm wishing for something in the future. I'm optimistic about something happening. That's not biblical hope. Maybe I could put it this way. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. It was a dream of mine. I even got a book that I would read as a kid. My mom saved it all these years. You could come to my house and read it about astronauts. But the thing is, as I got older, I realized that you need to be good at math and you need to enjoy science and you need to be smart. And so that was 3 strikes. I'm out. There's no way I'm going to be an astronaut. And so it moved from a hope in the way we use the word to the reality of it was just a wish or a want. It wasn't a hope because it wasn't in anything that was absolutely secure. If you're in the middle of grief, there's all sorts of things that we wish and that we want. I wish that it never happened. I want to wake up and this not be the case anymore. I long for this moment of grief to be over, but there is nothing that I could wish or want that's going to bring my loved one back. It happened. It's there. It's a reality. I can't escape it, but what I can do is hope in Jesus. I can put my faith and my hope in him. That's why there is such a big if in verse 14. That if you know in the midst of this that God loves you, that God cares for you, that God went to war with death and he won. God hates death more than you hate death. The pain that you're going through, he knows because his son went and died on a cross. He grieves with you. He empathizes with you, but he knows that he's conquered it. So there is hope. There is hope. There is hope because the resurrection is true. That's why the if is there, because God is with us. God with us. Emmanuel. It's a word you're going to hear a lot over this Christmas season. It's a name that we use for Jesus, Emmanuel, that he has come. As you know, today is the first day of Advent, that coming that we were anticipating in the birth of Jesus. But we, like the people of Thessalonica, right? Like the Thessalonians, we are in the in-between waiting on the second coming of Jesus. And while we wait, guess what we do? We hope. We hope. It's not lost on me that today, in the first day of Advent, this idea of coming and arrival this entire week, we're going to be focused on the word hope. It's the first week of Advent is hope because, see, hope and grief are tied together. And so we hope in Jesus. But for you and I both, the temptation is to not grieve with hope, but to grieve like the world grieves. That's why verse 13 is so important. And so what I want to do in the next 10 minutes that we have here or so is to just spend some time going, hey, if the temptation for the people that Paul was writing to was to grieve without hope, then I think that temptation is there for me as well. And so here's a few ways that we tend to grieve without hope. Now, none of these are bad. In fact, I would even say that you need to go through these phases in order to grieve well. But if you get stuck in them, then you need to identify that because it shows that you're losing hope in a God that loves you. And the first way that we get stuck in our grief is that we disown it. We just go, hey, I want to distance myself from that. I want nothing to do with it. I even want to act like it doesn't exist. This is even unintentionally encouraged in the language that we use. Like so often people will come and say, hey, can't you just put this behind you? Like, isn't it time to just be done with this? Can't you just get over it? Or maybe you say it of yourself, like, gosh, I just want to move on with life. And what we're doing in that moment is we're distancing ourselves. We're trying to stiff arm grief and say, no, I don't want to deal with you. I don't want anything to do with you. I want to disown you, and I don't need that. If it's not this idea of disowning it in that sense, then it's in blame. That when we try to blame someone for what happened, the pain that we're going through, and often we try to put that on God. And again, the psalmist gives us the ability to cry out to God in those moments of desperation. But what we're looking for is meaning in that. And sometimes, in fact, most often, the why that we're looking for is just simply, I don't know. We're not going to get an answer to it. And so in order to not disown grief, we have to begin to own it. We have to go through it and understand you are not being punished by God. God is not mad at you. So call out, cry out, lament, find your psalm and scream it from the mountaintops, write it on your arm and own the grief. Go through the process. But if we don't disown it, then we move to maybe just distracting ourselves. We go, man, I just want to distract myself from the grief because I don't want to deal with it. This starts with the funeral arrangements, which again are a good thing to do. It's something we need to do, but it's an immediate distraction. And distraction from grief, it works at least for a little while. Until you wake up in the middle of the night and you reach over and the bed is cold next to you. Until it's Friday when your loved one always called and the phone doesn't ring. Until it's Christmas and the tradition that you always had that was led by that family member, they're not there to lead it anymore, and the grief sets in, and so we get busy trying to distract ourselves from the grief. In fact, I did a little research this week and found that the average bereavement time that businesses give individuals is 3 to 7 weeks. We only in our corporate world give people 3 to 7, I said weeks, it's days, 3 to 7 days there. As if to say that that's all you need to grieve, because there's still deadlines to meet. There's still things that need to be closed on. There's still money to make, and the rest of the world is moving forward when you're still stuck in your grief. And so we distract ourselves from it. Again, this isn't all bad. Some distraction is good. It's part of helping us cope and go through grief. But it's bad when we distract ourselves to the point of never going through it. Then there's the third one, which is devour. You see, sometimes grief begins to define us. It becomes paralyzing and all-consuming. In the beginning, that's absolutely how grief is. It feels so overwhelming, and that's okay. But as life moves, you should move through your grief as well. It shouldn't become an all-consuming thing that devours you. Again, in research for this, I was reading a book on grief. It's written by a guy that's a grief counselor. And he told a story in there about a gal that reached out on Facebook to him and just something that she was going through and some grief of the loss of a loved one. And so he naturally reached out to her and he said, hey, I want to help you in this. And where do you live? And he found out the city. And he said, here's a website where you can go and find grief share groups that you can sit down with people and go through this together. And she goes, no, I don't do groups. And he goes, okay, I get that. Groups aren't for everybody. And he goes, how about this? Here's a list of counselors in your area that are grief counselors. And she said, no, I can't go out. And he said, oh, okay, is there something physical keeping you from leaving your home? And she said, no, the grief is just too much. I can't do it. He goes, so you never leave the house? And she goes, no, I go to work and I go to the grocery store and occasionally I go to Starbucks. And he said, okay, I understand. He goes, tell you what, part of my work is I have online workshops. Here's a link to an online workshop that you could do. And she says, no, I can't afford it. He goes, that's fine. I'll waive the fee. I'll have my assistant send you over a link that can waive the fee. And she goes, great. And he goes, cool. Can you give me your email address so that I can help you get signed up? And she goes, no, I don't give my email address out. I don't give personal information. And he goes, no, that I thought that's what emails were for, is so that you don't have to give out your personal information. She goes, I just can't do it. Which is the moment that he, as a professional counselor, realized there was nothing he could do because this woman had lost all hope and she was letting grief take over and devour her. You see, grief takes work. It's not passive, it's active. But you get a vote. You get a vote in how you move through grief. And so you can decide. You can decide how you go through grief. You can decide that what Scripture says is true, that we do not have to mourn as those without hope. Or you can decide, verse 14 of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, that if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, then we have hope and we can put faith in that. You get to decide that with whatever grief you're going through, with the loss of a loved one, a career, a business, the injustice in the world, the restrictions that we have, the loss of a celebration and activities, whatever your grief looks like, you get to decide to put your hope in Jesus. You get to decide to say, I am clinging onto and holding onto the one that defeated death. And hear me, this is not optimism about the future. This is not a glass half full mentality. No, this is assurance on the future because of who Jesus is, that you can have a life worth living. So maybe for some of you today, that's as simple as it is, that you would say yes to Jesus. He's the one that can bring you through the hardest times of your life. If you cling on in faith to the hope that you have, that he has defeated death and his resurrection. And so say yes to that, to cry it out wherever you're listening and just say yes. There's others of you though. You're not currently going through grief. And so I just want to take a few minutes here at the end to for those of you that aren't currently going through grief, I'm going to venture to say you know someone that is. And so there's some very strategic things that as you're walking with them through grief that you do and don't want to do. So if you're walking with someone that's going through a hard time, here's what you can do. You can pray for them. Like legitimately really pray for them. You can get in touch with them. And I mean, don't think about getting in touch with them. Get in touch with them. Shoot them a text right now that just says, hey, I love you and I'm thinking about you. And then as you get in touch with them, maybe you'll have an opportunity to sit with them. And that's the moment that you can listen to them. Ask open-ended questions. And then if you have an opportunity to talk about your memories of the deceased. All the things that you loved and that you cherished about them. And then as life moves forward, remember the special occasions, the anniversaries that they're gonna miss with that loved one, and just write them a note, write them a card, shoot them a text. You don't even have to say why. I promise you, they already are aware of it and know. But it reminds them they're not alone in their grief. And then ask them when it's the hardest. So one of the reasons we wanted to do this sermon right now at this time of year, because in the midst of the holidays is when things often get hard for those that are grieving. And so ask them whether it's a season or maybe it's a time of day. That's when you'll know to reach out and let them know that you're with them. There's also some things that you should avoid doing. For instance, don't try to eliminate the pain. That's not your job. Your job is to simply sit with them and be with them. Try to avoid cliches like I know how you feel, because even if you've been through the exact same situation, you actually don't know how they feel. Don't feel the temptation to answer the question of why. The truth of the matter is, we don't really know why a lot of the time. Don't put a time frame on their grief. One of my favorite sayings is that grief takes as long as grief takes. So enter into the process wherever they're at and just begin to walk with them there. Don't minimize the loss. We don't do this intentionally, but it often comes out when we say, well, at least they're in a better place, so the pain is gone now. And although that may be true, it's not helpful in the moment. It just minimizes what they're going through right then. And then don't change the subject when you get uncomfortable. So often we don't know what to do in those moments because I get uncomfortable, and so I just begin to talk and say things that I then later regret. Which is why, for those of you that are going through grief right now, if you're in the middle of grief, if I could come and be with you, I wouldn't give you the 6 stages of grief. I wouldn't try to give some pithy statements. We would look at Scripture and look to Jesus and talk, but really at the end of the day, what I would want to do is simply sit down with you. I just want to sit in your grief with you. And so as strange as it may be to do right now in this moment, I just want to do that. I just want to give you permission to lament and to cry. If you're sitting with someone, reach over and grab their hand. We know how hard this is, and so let's take a moment right now. As my friends Becca and Natty sing over us that God doesn't waste anything in our lives, let's just sit in grief together.
In the darkest of nights, when the quiet is deafening, in the depths of my pain, when peace is lost, in the lowest of valleys, when fear takes hold of me, you pull me close. 'Cause you don't waste the heartache, you don't waste the pain. You see every tear that falls and never look away. You don't waste the waiting, you don't waste the shame. You gather up the pieces and you put them back again. When I lose my way and have no clarity, when faith has failed and I can't see, and when all that I've built comes crashing down on me, oh, you hold me close. 'Cause you don't waste the heartache, you don't waste the pain, and you see every tear that falls and never look away. And you don't waste the waiting, you don't waste the shame. You gather up the pieces and you put them back again. Oh, Lord. Step by step, day by day, through the scars you make a way. Brick by brick, piece by piece, you're rebuilding all of me. Step by step, day by day, through the scars you make a way. Brick by brick, piece by piece, you're rebuilding all of me. Step by step, day by day, through the scars you make a way. Brick by brick, piece by piece, you're rebuilding all of me. Oh, you don't waste the heartache, you don't waste the pain, and you see every tear that falls and never look
As I sat there, I don't know what that was for you, but I just began to pray for the friends and the family that I know that have lost loved ones this year and the funerals that I didn't get to attend. Which is why this moment is so important. Because as we take communion together, we're reminded that we have a hope in a risen Savior. That his body, which is represented by the bread, was put on the cross and it was broken so that you and I can have an eternal hope in him. And that we have the wine that represents his blood that was poured out. That he put death to death by his own life, rising from the dead, conquering it once and for all. And so therefore we do not have to grieve as those that have no hope. We get to grieve with a God that loves us and cares for us enough to give his life for us. Let's take communion now. Thanks for joining us as we launched this Advent season. We hope that you'll engage with the different Advent devotionals that we're offering during this time. Next week, we're going to be starting a brand new series at our church. You're not going to want to miss it as we kick off an amazing Christmas season. We'll see you next week.